Hi, Glenys.
Hey, Aaron. What do you want to talk about today?
How much I hate diets.
Yeah, diets suck.
So what do you do instead of a diet?
Intuitive eating, health at every size.
So how many times have you had to explain intuitive eating and health at every size to someone?
Like 5,000 times. But that was just to my doctor.
Okay, so how many times have you explained it to someone and then they said, but diets are the only thing I know?
That's like every time. Can we pursue health without thinking about weight?
Yes, we can pursue health without thinking about weight.
That's pretty revolutionary, what you just said. But what if you just don't like yourself at the size that you're at?
I think we need to understand why, instead of just saying I need to change.
So what's the deal with body positivity?
Oh man, that's a long answer. I'm Aaron Flores.
And I'm Glenys Oyston. And we are
Dietitians Unplugged.
Hello, lovely listeners. Welcome back to another Dietitians Unplugged episode. Aaron and Glenys in the house.
Yo, yo.
Yeah. How's it going?
Yo, it's awesome. I just want to say yo for everything.
Yeah. There's nothing more disturbing than middle-aged people saying yo.
Really?
I guess there are many more disturbing things
Yeah.
than that. So, yo, here we are.
I pull it off pretty well. Yo.
You totally do.
Yeah.
You totally do. So we are back with another episode, and we're so excited for this one because we've got Julie Dillon on, and she is a great dietitian that we met a while back, and she has an amazing podcast called Love Food, and we hope you're also listening to that in addition to this one. And she's a health at every size dietitian, and we're really excited to have her here.
Yeah, and I think we talked a lot about PCOS with her, and she's going to provide us some really great information about this issue because it affects so many women, and there's not a lot of great resources for people to go and learn more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me read her bio, actually.
Shoot, go for it.
So Julie is a fat-positive dietitian, eating disorder specialist, and food behavior expert who partners with people along their food peace journey. She owns a group nutrition therapy private practice in Central North Carolina using only weight-inclusive and attuned eating approaches. Julie began specializing in treating Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome in 2005 after noticing the connection with weight bias and eating disorders, and she is launching her e-course, a step-by-step guide for PCOS and food peace, in September 2017. Julie also hosts the weekly podcast Love Food, a Dear Abby show for those with eating concerns hoping to rewrite their fate with food. She has spoken at the Food and Nutrition Conference and Expo with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the Psychotherapy Networker Symposium, and the EDRD Pro Symposium. She was also the featured expert dietitian on TLC's documentary, My Big Fat Fabulous Life.
Yeah, and it's a really awesome discussion. I'm really thankful that she took the time to speak to us, and I think everyone's going to really enjoy the information that she can provide us all.
Yeah. Update on what's happening with you?
It's hot. It's summer still here in LA.
Yeah.
I'm sweating.
All the time.
Yo.
All the time, yo.
But aside from me sweating, I just want to say that I launched a program to have 100 conversations with men about bodies, and I'm still recruiting folks for that. So if you're interested, it's a 30-minute conversation, whatever you want to talk about. You don't have to be health at every size informed. You could be dieting. You could be doing whatever you are doing. I just want to talk to different men about their body image experience and get a lot of different perspectives. So if you're interested, just shoot me an email at aaronfloresrdn@gmail.com. And I'm still seeing clients in my private practice, both in person and virtually.
Yes, as am I. I opened my office over the past 4 months it's in the Brentwood area of Los Angeles. So I am seeing
Swanky.
Yes, my office is less swanky than you would think for that area, but but it's still okay. And so now seeing clients in person, which is so exciting for me because I've mostly been seeing people virtually. And then I was also, I did a presentation in July for the EDRD Pro Symposium, which you were also a part of.
Yeah.
And that was totally cool. So, so if you're a dietitian, just Google EDRD Pro Symposium and check that out because you're going to get a lot of good, there's CEUs to be had. It's a really good program. It's run by Sumner Brooks. So check it out.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. So without further ado, here is our interview with Julie Dillon.
Julie, welcome to our podcast. It is so exciting to have you on. You have your own amazing podcast, and Aaron and I have both been guests, and we loved that. And now we're so excited to have you here to talk about your expertise.
Well, Glenys and Aaron, thank you so much for inviting me on. I love your podcast. People I talk to here love it too, so I am excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think being on your podcast was awesome. I love that your whole notion of just that food writes a letter back to someone is really great. And I think it was super fun to be on your podcast. So it's great to have you back on ours.
Thanks.
So I can't imagine that anybody listening to us has not actually heard your podcast, but just in case there are a few people out there, can you just tell us a little bit about how you decided to become a non-diet, anti-pursuit of weight loss, health at every size dietitian?
Sure. So my podcast is Love Food. And when I was growing up, I had a couple friends who were people of size. And when I was growing up, I was like, if you lined up every Duffy that's alive, we're all these kind of gangly people and all look kind of the same. And what I noticed with my friends who were in larger bodies is we were eating the same stuff and moving the same way, but we were different sizes, but they got made fun of. And that hurt, that hurt me because they're my friends. And I was a very shy and gawky, awkward kid. So I didn't really have a voice yet to say anything, but I just remember that sticking with me. And then as years went on, I became a dietitian, and I never was really into dieting, but that's just what you're told to do. So I did it. And so then when I was working with families, I was in particular working with children in larger bodies, and I was hired on to help them lose weight. So that's, again, what I did. I just kind of followed doctor's orders. And what I noticed is that for a lot of the families, what I was doing was not working. What all of us were doing was not working. And families either didn't come back after we tried to help them lose weight, or for one of the kids to lose weight, or if they did, the weight was going up instead of down. And so I remember thinking, like, I think I'm missing something. So I dug for, a while. I'd be like, what can I do differently? And I experimented with some MI stuff, or motivational interviewing. But ultimately what it led me to is a degree in mental health counseling. And that's when I started to also get introduced to intuitive eating. And actually, when I left that job, the dietitian that replaced me, that was going to be doing kind of the same work, I told her, I was like, I think I'm going to become a mental health counselor and leave this dietitian thing behind because it doesn't really mesh with me. And I don't know, it just doesn't really make sense. And I don't think I'm really helping anyone. And she's like, oh, you should read Intuitive Eating. I think you would like it. I'm like, okay. And I'm glad I did, because I was like, oh, these are my dietitians. These are my people. Like, they are kind of wired like me. And it basically introduced me to this other world that was, really aligning with some of my values and also how I practiced my own kind of health behaviors and things. And then eventually, when I finished that degree in mental health counseling, I got a job because, after 2 years of grad school, I was like broke, and I was like, I'll just get a job and just doing anything at that point. And I found this really cool job that allowed me to do some behavior counseling, but also I needed to help people who were going through bariatric surgery. And I didn't really have an opinion at that point. I was kind of neutral on that whole concept. But about 6 months into it, I found myself really aligning with health at every size approaches, and yet having to teach people how to do like liquid diets and prep for bariatric surgery. So you could probably understand how that would keep me up at night. Like, ethically, it was like this major dilemma. And I went to my boss one day and I was like crying and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And she's like, hey, if you want this job, you have to do this. And so then I quit and I was like, all right, I guess I can't do this anymore. So I ended up opening my own practice and that was around 2005. And I think by the end of 2005, like maybe close to beginning of 2006 was probably the last time I breathed anything about a diet. I think I was probably on the fence for a year or so, like a lot of us are. And then since then I really feel like I'm at this place where I'm seeing people actually coming back and they're getting to a place where they're healthier, more long-term instead of this kind of like quick fix kind of thing that never really worked. So that's kind of my like twisted, convoluted tale of how I became this weight inclusive dietitian.
It's so interesting because I think as we ask this question to more and more people, there's so many similarities that with people just almost like saying like I was miserable doing what I was doing and I needed something else, and that moment where we find it and it's life-giving. It helps us revive our careers. It helps us find more meaning in our work. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah. Well, and the thing I have to appreciate with all of that, in case someone listening is a dietitian or another health professional in a similar place, is at that moment when I got that instruction from my boss that I was basically like, yeah, you got to do this if you want this job. I was also had just gotten married. And so I was able to add insurance. I got insurance for my husband's job, and we were in a place financially where I could make the jump. And I really feel for people who find themselves having to stay in a job that they cannot stand, and ethically they're feeling like this dilemma. And they have to stay there in order to like pay the bills, So I appreciate the privileges I had in those moments to be able to make that jump. And I am so thankful that I was able to do it.
Yeah, so are we.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you sort of become, well, you know many things, obviously, but I know that one of your areas of expertise are PCOS, which is Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, right?
Correct.
Did I got that? I got that right? So can you tell us, for those of us who don't know what PCOS is, can you tell us a little bit about what it is and symptoms, or how you get diagnosed, or how it affects you?
Yes. And, PCOS, or like you said, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, is a condition that affects so many people. And the thing that's surprising is that I talk to people with PCOS and they're like, I don't know anybody else with it. I'm like, oh, yeah, you do, because it's the most common cause of infertility. And there are some statistics that say that 1 in 10 people, or 1 in 10 women, have PCOS. And it's basically a set of symptoms that's the result of a hormonal imbalance. And it's an endocrine disorder characterized by high levels of androgens like testosterone. And women also experience missed or irregular or painful periods. It was first discovered, I think, in like the 1930s. And, there was an ultrasound done and people saw these pearls around the ovaries, and it was termed polycystic ovarian syndrome for that reason. But they're not actually cysts. They're multiple tiny follicles that can be on one or both ovaries. But in actuality, a person doesn't even have to have these follicles or cysts in order to have PCOS. They really just need to have 2 of 3 conditions in order to get the diagnosis. And one of them is irregular periods, or if they're not ovulating, or painful periods. And then another one is high level androgens like testosterone. Or they don't even have to have like blood drawn. You can just have signs of high testosterone, like having excess body hair, or facial hair, or hair loss on the scalp. So it's funny because you don't even have to have polycystic ovaries to have this condition. So they really need to change the name. But in the end, though, it's really this condition that is a diagnosis of exclusions. There's not like an exact test. And a lot of people that I talk to, they're like, well, I'm not really sure if I have it. And because they feel like they just don't have this like exact marker, and this is where the feminist in me comes out. I'm like, it's just not a lot. It's not a fancy disease that people like to research. And so there's just not a lot of money pouring into this women's condition. And so there's as many people who have PCOS, there's just not a lot of research behind it. And it's really a shame because, again, it affects so many people and it affects like every part of their body. One thing we know is that PCOS starts in the brain. It starts in the hypothalamus, and it ends up affecting hormones. And one of the first signs for many of my clients when they look back is a mood disorder when they were in puberty or pre-puberty. They'll be like, oh yeah, I remember when I was 9 or 10 and I started to feel depressed or anxious. And then when they went through puberty, there may have been problems with that. And then they went through some common changes that happen in the 20s. Like a lot of people experience a change in their weight and again with the facial hair. But because it starts in the hypothalamus, it ends up affecting mood. It affects ovulation, so fertility. It also affects how we are able to use food that we eat for energy, and also affects like bone development and bone mass. Name it. It basically affects it. Constipation and diarrhea is another thing that's affected by it. Dry eyes. It's like every part of the body ends up basically getting affected by PCOS because of the hormonal involvement. So that may be as clear as mud, but that's basically what PCOS is. It's not like something that's super well defined, but it certainly affects a lot of people and affects them in every area of their life.
Yeah, so so I have a personal connection with this. My wife has PCOS, and I am the one who sort of told her, you might have this, because I learned about it in college. Someone came and lectured to our nutrition group, a doctor from the Student Health Center, and lectured about PCOS. And I kept thinking, I was like, I think my wife like has all these symptoms, and she had struggled with going to like dermatologists like her whole life, and they just kept wanting to put her on like more and more like severe medications for her acne, when in reality it was the PCOS that was driving all of this. And it really just sort of opened up a wealth of knowledge for us about like why, or for her, of why all this was happening.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing that this condition can affect so many people and it can affect every part of life, yet we know so little about treating it?
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Totally. I mean, she, the facial hair, I mean, it's like all that stuff. I mean, it was just, and what's interesting, and we'll get to this as we talk more and more with you, but like that connection with body image is, how it can be such an such a powerful tool, not the right word, powerful influence on body image, because someone's struggling with all these things that are sort of not socially acceptable, and then that ripple into so many other behaviors.
Yeah. A lot of women tell me that they feel like their body just doesn't work like it's supposed to, or they don't feel as feminine. And when you put infertility in there too, I feel like you should just never mess with maternal desire. I mean, that's a really intense experience, and PCOS is the leading cause of infertility. So it's a really trying time, certainly, for
Absolutely.
anyone who experiences it. Yeah,
and it's why we have twins. I'll just say that.
Mysteries explained.
Mystery explained. Yeah.
So one of the reasons I think it was so important for me to talk to you about this is because what I have heard, because I have several friends with PCOS, and what I have heard is that the common advice given out is that if you're someone with PCOS and you're overweight or obese, as much as I don't like saying those words, and that's the medical terms that are used to describe being larger, that they should lose weight to improve their chances of fertility. And so, we're health at every size dietitians. So it's sort of like, how do we square that? And does the evidence even bear that out at all?
Mm-hmm. So I have two prongs with that, because, the first part of that, and when I tell people that I work with who are affected by PCOS, is like, we don't have any diet that's going to provide any outcomes that are going to last for you. Research for any condition, and including those affected by PCOS, is not long-term when they study any kind of diet. Most of the ones that I'm reading are 4 weeks to 16 weeks long. So I'm like, hey, anybody could do a diet for that long,
Totally.
and who cares if there's good outcomes, because really what happens after that? And we know, that the 2-year mark, weight goes back up, and for what is it, a third to 2/3, it goes even higher. So that's one part of it. I'm like, even if lowering the weight would help any of your symptoms of PCOS, or any of what's going on at the core of PCOS, we don't have any options that work. Okay, so, and when I was preparing for this conversation, because I was really excited, so I wanted to have all my ducks in a row, I started to go down this rabbit hole because I was getting stuck on the fertility piece. And when I talk to clients, and I have lots of things that I tell them about it, but since I was going to be talking to you all on your podcast, I wanted to actually have some research that I could point to and you guys could link to. And I found some really interesting stuff. The American Society of Reproductive Medicine is basically the journal in the U.S. that most will look to for PCOS research. It's pretty much the one that I find the most right now. And they have a consensus on infertility treatment related to PCOS, which was published in, 2008. And I also found something from 2015. And they said in there some I'm going to say it, but I also want to be like, pause, I don't agree with it, because it made me dig. But it said improve fertility with a drop of body weight of only 5 to 10%. And it said it was outside of BMI. So it was almost like, we don't care how big or small you are. If you lose 5% of your body weight, it could improve fertility. And I was like, whoa, pause here. Let me look at that article that you're citing, because I don't really understand that. And so when I looked at that, I was blown away on how many leaps that they were making in their consensus statement from this research. And it basically said that yes, that the research that they were looking at was 4 weeks to 4 months, and they for half of the research cited, not even all of them, they showed an improvement in ovulation or egg quality. Again, 4 weeks to 4 months, that's not really a long time, but for someone who's trying to get pregnant, and I'm someone who experienced primary and secondary infertility, I would have done anything to get pregnant. So who cares? I'll do anything for 4 months if I can have a baby that comes from it. But not all the research was showing that, but some of it was. But they said in there that there's no research that shows that weight loss prior to conception improves the live birth rate in quote unquote obese women with or without PCOS. So it may make the egg quality better, but we're not sure if it really helps you come home with a baby. So I was like, So I'm like, is your goal just to have maybe better egg quality for a few weeks or a live birth? And so they went on to say that the effects of calorie restriction, increased physical activity, any kind of pharmacological interventions during the conceptional period are all unknown and potentially harmful on the goal of a live birth. So I was like, wait, so you're saying you suggest this to help with getting pregnant, and honestly, the primary treatment for PCOS across the board, whether you're trying to get pregnant or not, the primary treatment is weight loss. Okay, that's not mine, but that's what the standard treatment is for any medical recommendation at this point. And including with people who have infertility with PCOS. But yet when I dug through this research, it was saying that basically that same recommendation could be potentially harmful to actually having a live birth. So yeah, take that research with a massive grain of salt, because that is just wrong. And I feel like women with PCOS, and this is why I feel like the passion has been really just stirred up in me with working with people with PCOS, is because they are affected by weight stigma. And I feel like all of us are, but there's something about it with PCOS that really pisses me off. And because more women with PCOS are in larger bodies, and there are women who are not large with PCOS, of course, but I feel like there's this extra they have to go this extra mile, or they have less access to a quality of life that people without PCOS get a chance to experience. And if we take weight off the table and we treat PCOS without pursuing weight loss, people have a really wonderful, healthy, long-term, outcomes, and they are able to get pregnant just like anybody else. It's just that this research has, I feel like, really preventing them from getting, I don't know how to say this. I kind of lost words too. Like it prevents them from getting quality research basically to show this, because everyone is thinking that we need to look at weight loss. So
to me, it also sounds like it boils down the advice into like one small thing, right? Oh, just do this and everything will get better, instead of like the multifaceted issues that are going on. It's like, oh no, just do this one thing and everything gets better.
Right. Yeah. And it stinks because there's 3 different kind of layers with infertility treatment with PCOS, and not layers, lines of treatment. And the weight is always the first line of treatment. And then it's using things like Clomid, and then or Femera or things like that, and then IVF. And so people are really being told, like, you need to lose weight first. And some doctors will give people a recommendation. In my area where I live in Central North Carolina, I hear a lot of people giving these random recommendations where I don't know where they're getting it. Like, you have to lose 30 pounds before we will go any further with your reproductive endocrinology workup, and which is just, I'm like, where'd you get the 30? What's that from? And even that research that I was looking through earlier, it said 5%, they're showing a difference. And so if someone is 200 pounds and loses 5%, that means they're at 190. And I know people who are 190 pounds who doctors would still say, no, you're still too big. Right. And so, I'm like, they're not even really going with what the research is suggesting anyway, even though that research I found to be hilarious because it didn't show what they were saying it was supposed to be showing. So there's this person, right, who is very, who wants to have a baby, wants to start a family, grow their family. And the sort of key to next treatments of what you're saying is being held and guarded in, around weight loss. Right. Mm-hmm. And then, if that person is unsuccessful, we can only imagine what happens, right? The detriment of that, what drastic measures they'll go to achieve that goal, just to get to the next stage of treatment. Exactly. And I think about how this affects different people and where they're coming from. And, I work with some people who are in same-sex relationships. And, there are some people with PCOS who are in heterosexual partnerships, and they have, I don't know how else to call this, but access to the equipment all the time. And so, like, sometimes they can just get pregnant without getting intervention. But there are some people who are in same-sex relationships who don't have access to that. And, I feel like it's even more discriminatory, and I almost feel like I don't really have the words for it yet, but I just know I'm really pissed off about it. And I like, we need to do something about this because this is just not right,
I so appreciate all these examples because I'm pissed now. I mean, like it really sort of shines a light on how maddening it all is, and how frustrating it can be for the individual in that actual living that experience.
Yeah. So along with the advice of weight loss, which sounds like it's not really all that evidence-based, I think I've heard that the diet recommendations, they're quite restrictive. So I've heard like avoid gluten and avoid dairy. And I feel like, that's basically eliminating 2 huge kind of food groups or parts of food groups out of your diet. And I'm just wondering if those kinds of restrictions are really warranted, in the absence of like definitive food intolerances or allergies.
Of course. I find so many people come to me and they're avoiding gluten, dairy, sugar, carbs. I'm like, how are you like maintaining any kind of blood pressure? Yeah. How is your brain not dead? And gluten and dairy in particular, I love to discuss because there's research on it. And at first it may look favorable by avoiding those, but it really isn't. And what it comes down to, first with gluten, when a person removes gluten, and this is just from the research I've been reading on it, in the first 4 to 8 weeks, they notice an improvement in things like insulin resistance. But around the 2 to 3 month mark, the benefit goes away. So there's something about maybe a Band-Aid. It promotes some kind of change in insulin levels. I'm not really sure what, but it's only temporary. And so you may talk to people who are like, I feel great when I took out gluten. I just felt so great. But then eventually they didn't feel great anymore. Like the symptoms kind of come back. And I find most of the recommendations are just like that. They're more looking at the surface of PCOS. And I feel like same with, focusing on weight, it's just looking at a surface type of symptom instead of the core of what's behind it. And, PCOS is genetic and environmental, so you can't cure it, but we can get to the core of it and help it have less symptoms with it. And the dairy one is interesting because the research behind it is a little bit longer research. I can't remember exactly how long it is, but it's longer than 12 weeks. But it's technically a low dairy recommendation, which I think is really funny because how they define low dairy is 2 servings a day. And I talked to some people and they're like, oh, I thought I couldn't have any dairy. And I'm like, no, the research isn't long term, so we don't even know for sure. But if you followed it, like it's just 2 servings in a day. So some people are like, oh, well, that's what I've always done. I'm like, okay, so
already there.
Already there. Check that box off.
Yeah.
So, so when it comes down to it, I feel like so much of the nutrition advice that we hear right now focuses on carbs in particular. And for me, when I educate people with PCOS, I, in particular, save carbs for the very last thing. I think it's the worst thing to address in the beginning. I think it's like putting the cart before the horse because when we just focus on carbs, it's only going to make a person feel like they're being tortured, and really getting to, moving people with PCOS away from dieting, making sure they're eating enough, and then treating their insulin levels. That alone helps with so many of the symptoms, whether it's insulin resistance or anovulation. And so yeah, a lot of the advice that we're getting currently, or if you just Googled it, or any of the PCOS gurus out there that are saying, I cured my PCOS, really what they're doing is just doing these surfacey kind of things that are not showing long-term that they really help.
Do you feel like there's more of these sort of gurus or type PCOS diets coming out? Because I mean, again, maybe it's because of my connection to it, but I tend to see it. I think it's becoming more and more not common, but people are hearing about it more and more. People are understanding that it's a thing more and more. So do you see like a rise in sort of this PCOS diet propaganda, I guess, for lack of a better word?
That's a good word. Well, if it affects 1 in 10 women, then that's a lot of people. And especially when people are desperate, like because of infertility or because, people with PCOS, they've tried everything to try to change their weight. They don't have to be told like, hey, you're too big by society's standards. Like they already know that. And they've tried everything to try to change it. And so I feel like it's pretty natural for some people in the world to prey on that vulnerability and say, hey, I have something that works for you. And, honestly, there's probably some things out there that like the gluten or the dairy or whatever that maybe work for someone, but they're the exception, not the rule. And what I see happening is those people who are the exception rather than the rule, they end up really saying, hey, I cured it. And so do what I did and buy my stuff. So, and I think if you're looking for a really useful PCOS information, I would really encourage you to look towards people that let you know that you are the expert in your body. Like, I feel like having PCOS means that your body has a different language, a different way of communicating than those without PCOS. And you're still an expert of your body too, just like everybody else is. And if someone's telling you not to trust it and to torture it, and you just aren't trying hard enough, and that they can cure it, like that's total BS. Don't run away from that. They're really selling you something that's not in the end going to be helpful. And it really honestly could be more harmful for the PCOS long term.
Yeah. So somebody coming to you who has PCOS, and you have, your health at every size perspective. How are you sort of working with them, and what are you recommending for them, or how do you work with them?
So most people who come to me with PCOS, they are in some kind of negative body image or eating disorder or disordered eating experience. We know that women with PCOS are 6 times more likely to experience an eating disorder. And somehow I've kind of connected the two of those just because I was working with eating disorders first, and I kept running into PCOS. And so I was like, hey, I don't have any way to really help people with this thing. What do I do? And I just started seeking out more and more training, and I would only seek out training that was not weight normative. I wanted something that was not going to be focusing on diets, because I was like, diets don't work. And so one of the very first things that I tell women with PCOS is I say, it's important to not pursue weight loss anymore, because it's keeping your body from getting enough nutrition. And it's, because of the high insulin levels that are so common with PCOS, it's not every single person has high insulin levels with PCOS, but it's like 70 to 80% of people with it have these high circulating insulin levels. It basically is like this growth hormone, and it can basically, even if you're getting very low amounts of nutrition, people are not losing weight and sometimes still gaining. And I used to call it like, wow, you're hardcore dieting. But I think I had my own kind of fat phobia, fat stigma going on, because I'm like, no, that's not hardcore dieting. That's anorexia. Like, that's like what people are doing to try to change their weight. And so what I have found is that when a person cuts their nutrition too low, it ends up promoting more inflammation that's common with chronic inflammation that's common with PCOS. So I help them make sure they're getting enough food. And then I basically have come to appreciate that women with PCOS need more protein. They just need more. I don't necessarily want them to cut out anything, but I encourage them to experiment with eating more protein, especially first thing in the day and then before going to bed at night. There seems to be something about how that helps with managing insulin levels. And I also recommend some supplements like omega-3 supplements, and then inositol, which is a secondary messenger and helps with insulin resistance with PCOS. So when people are doing that work, I mean, that's the core of it. And I find that takes care of it, like 50 to 75% of the symptoms associated with it. And I kind of spoke about it sort of quickly, like that can take like 3 or 4 months to do, like all of that,
Right.
It can take a while. And we live in this world that's so like, give it to me now, like impulsive. And what I have found is reversing some of the damage that's been done from the chronic inflammation and the push for weight loss. It takes 3 to 6 months of eating enough and being kind to the body to really get to the point where some of the deficits and deficiencies start to heal with PCOS. And so a lot of times people with PCOS don't feel better until around the 3-month mark of doing some of this work, which I hate. I'm like, I wish it was faster, but I like to tell people from the get-go, I'm like, if you could just give me 3 to 6 months, put the weight loss in the back burner for just 3 to 6 months, and let's try this out. And, let me know how you're feeling at that mark. And then you can go back if you want to. And what I find is people don't. They feel great. They feel like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. And they can tell they're healthier, whether or not the scale's different. That's not something that's really going to be aligning with whether or not they're healthy. So
that's great information. What you sort of alluded to the eating disorder connection a little bit more, and the stats 6 times more likely to be struggling with an eating disorder. When did you start to see this connection? And you mentioned how you saw some clients with PCOS in your practice, but how do you see that sort of connection developing for people, and how has all this work that you're doing sort of come together in those areas?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like the connection with eating disorders and PCOS, like why it's so commonly together, is multifaceted. And part of it is what PCOS is all about. Like I said before, it starts in the hypothalamus, so it affects all the hormones that we talked about earlier, and it affects mood because mood is also in our hypothalamus. And so a mood disorder is quite common. And so women, when they're struggling with PCOS and maybe not even know that they have it yet, there's lots of things that happen with the body, like we've said, how there's hair in places they don't want it, hair leaving in other places where they want to keep it. And the body is shifting. For many people, they end up having larger bellies, and the world tells them that that's not okay. And so part of why I think it happens, part of it is, just that how mood disorders are so commonly connected. And yet I feel like our fat phobic world, if it wasn't fat phobic, I think there would be a lot less eating disorders with PCOS, because what ends up happening is as time goes on and before people know they have it, rapid weight gain is something that happens really commonly. And there was an opportunity I had a couple years ago to be on a show called My Big Fat Fabulous Life. And her name, the person in the show, is Whitney Thor. And so I was her dietitian. And one of the things that she experienced that's so common is that she gained 100 pounds her first year of college. And there's something about that time period, the early 20s, where a lot of people gain weight with PCOS. And so what so many people do is then they're like, okay, well, I need to eat less. I need to exercise more. And for people with PCOS, what they find is that it just doesn't work. And if they do Weight Watchers or keto or, Atkins or any of those things, and they do it with their friends, and their friends are losing weight, but they're not. And then they have to exercise twice as hard, and they may lose 1 pound and their friend loses 10. And so they're like, well, I guess I just have to do it more and do it more. And they keep going and going and going. And sometimes when the weight starts to change, even though they're literally killing themselves and practicing anorexia, the healthcare providers, people in their family are saying, hey, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And so I think it's just, it's part of an environmental hazard, that their body shape, because of the disorder, because of that insulin resistance leading to weight changes for many of the women, our world telling them that that's not acceptable, that it leads to eating disorders for way too many. So if we could fix that part, I think it would help the connection tremendously. I don't think there would be as much of that dual diagnosis.
You're speaking of the fat phobic part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think that's a interesting perspective, I think. And I was drawing it all out as you were writing it, and all the sort of factors. And, it's interesting because so many of these factors are already there even without the PCOS, right? The thin ideal, the fat phobic society, so many people already struggling with, mood disorders, but also, diet culture and all these things. And then again, they're sort of tackling this weight, and their body under the guise of, oh, I just ate too much or something's wrong with my body, and not really understanding the underlying cause of the PCOS. Mm-hmm. And so again, I think of my wife who's going to all these dermatologists and trying to come up with answers, and everyone's just giving her, oh, you're just not, we don't have the right medicine, right? You're not dieting hard enough for these other folks, right? Mm-hmm. And it totally makes sense why this could happen. It also, to me, really complicates their recovery on some level. And I'm one, because I'm thinking of how they learn to accept their body and struggling with, so many of these other parts of it. And so I'm interested in your perspective of how you see their recovery from eating disorders with PCOS.
I feel like women, or I feel like anyone who's in recovery with PCOS, really, we need to help them advocate for themselves, because as a eating disorder professional, I appreciate that most clinicians don't have a lot of knowledge about eating disorders, and I feel like they should be putting their foot in the mouth, because they say things sometimes I'm like, why did you say that? And with people in recovery with PCOS, that ends up really harming their recovery, because if weight is the thing that they're looking at and not really acknowledging that, the pursuit of weight loss for anyone who's trying to recover from an eating disorder, that is something that's it could be a fatal error, that could literally kill someone, because we know that eating disorders have such a high mortality rate. So one of the things that I really want people with PCOS to be able to be more comfortable with. And as I say this, I'm like, God, I hate saying it because you shouldn't have to advocate for yourself. But I find that if we can help you find some mantras or things to say to the doctor or any healthcare provider to help prevent that just cliche, just lose weight in order to treat it, that can help a recovery. But I think also the more that people with PCOS can connect with that they are indeed the expert of their body, just like anyone else, like anyone. I didn't really say this, but so many people with PCOS say that I can't practice intuitive eating because I have PCOS. It just doesn't work for PCOS. And I'm like, no. I think if anything, it works more for PCOS. I think your body tells you when it has an unmet need, and it's just gonna say it in a different way. It's gonna have a completely different language. So we need to help you figure out what your language is. But like, you can still do intuitive eating and you're still the expert. And I think for people going through infertility, they get used to doing that, especially these days. We're used to like marching in the doctor's office and being like, I'm not waiting another year to try to conceive. I know something is wrong. You need to do a workup. And, doing those kind of things with PCOS, I find really helps also protect recovery. And so, you can say to your doctor, I don't want to be weighed. You don't have to be weighed. I feel like it's this thing that people think they have to do when they go to the doctor. But I know in order for doctors to be able to file with insurance, they need to get 3 measures every time they go to the doctor or every time a patient goes in there. And what are the 3 things? Well, they take your weight, they get your blood pressure and your temperature. So then they have 3 measures that they did, and they didn't have to spend any money. But they can find some other ones. They don't have to get your weight.
What I also heard about that is I heard it from a doctor last year at the Beta conference that if they put refused, that counts as getting a weight.
That's right. I have heard that before, and it may have been from you, Glenys, listening to your podcast. but I have told people that too, and they have done that. So yeah, they don't even have to do another one. So, protecting that part of it is such a small part of the experience, but I also appreciate how hard that is, to be able to speak up, and it's not as small as it seems, to in that moment to be able to like, hey, I don't want to get weighed. I need to protect my recovery. But I have other people that I work with PCOS and recovery who've just point blank said to their doctor, I do not appreciate hearing any interventions that have to do with weight. I'm in recovery from an eating disorder. It almost killed me. And any discussion on that will put me at risk again. All I want to hear is the interventions that you tell people who are smaller with PCOS. Thank you. So
that's brilliant.
Yeah. And they just kind of have this verbiage they just say, and they're like, I don't care if you like it or not, but this is what I need. And yeah, you need medical providers though. You need them in order to manage PCOS.
Yes.
And so they have to do it, which I feel like really sucks, but maybe eventually they can change things. But for right now, that's just what it is.
I almost see like your next offering is a little downloadable MP3 of you just saying that, and someone just hitting like play on their phone, and then Julie comes out and says, that sentence, and just like bang, and then turn off, and then okay, we can start again.
They can actually get that from this podcast,
right? Exactly.
Just cue it up.
Yeah.
Well, I am working on something that includes a piece on advocacy that I have some audio files with it, but I haven't thought about doing that. But that actually is a really good idea.
I just want a nickel per one download. A nickel. That's it. Just a nickel.
That's funny. Okay, I can do that.
Sweet.
Perfect.
So, Julie, I know you just started a Facebook group for PCOS and Nutrition, and you have some programs coming up. So can you share a little bit about the group and what programs you have coming?
Yes. And even before I go into that, I wanted to kind of share with you how that evolved, because I think it's really important and really kind of cool. But part of the problem for me, I haven't mentioned this yet, is that I'm not affected by PCOS. I don't have it. And I'm really never going to understand the experience. It's something I can try really hard to understand, but I'm not ever really going to get the ins and outs and what it's like to walk this earth with PCOS. And about a year ago, I met this woman who's a dietitian in training, and her name is Kimberly Singh. And she was, training to become a dietitian and sought out information on health at every size and weight inclusive approaches. And so we've gotten to know each other. And what I found out is that she's affected by PCOS too. And So she has started to do some writing for me, and as any good student, she really enjoys research, and so is digging really deep for me to help us to find the research behind ways to intervene with PCOS and not using the pursuit of weight loss. And while we were doing all this work together, she said, Julie, have you ever Googled PCOS and wait for Google to pull up extra words? And what always is the first option, because it's the number one search thing for people with PCOS, is they're always searching PCOS and support, because we don't have support. I've tried to do group support in person in my office, and we do lots of groups here at my group practice, but the PCOS ones just never really took off. And what Kimberly and other women have told me is that there's a lot of shame with PCOS, even though it's so common. It just feels really shameful, and it's basically just over the years what they've come accustomed to. And so Kimberly's like, we need a way to help support people with PCOS. And so I was like, wait, let's just make a Facebook group. That's where everybody is anyway. And then we can take out the in-person piece. And it's been amazing. And whenever I talk about it, I always get a little like misty eyed and get a little choked up, because I feel like so privileged that they let me be in there and, walk alongside them as they're trying to navigate this world with this really crappy condition that they don't get support with, and what's been the most eye-opening is the experience of eating disorder recovery and also mood disorders with PCOS. And it's a really tough road. And, the part with the Facebook group is that we can't make it easier, but we can make it so they have more options, and they feel like they can advocate for themselves. So that's one part of the Facebook group. And from there, I've worked with women with PCOS for so long now. I think it's going on 15 years. And I live in this really small town in central North Carolina. And I don't know, like you get to the point where I've met everybody probably in Greensboro who has it. And so, but I also was getting, especially after being on that TLC show, I was getting more and more people wanting to work with me virtually. But I'm also this primary caregiver for my kids, so I can only I only can work so many hours. So I have put everything on hold in my office, and I've been developing, basically, if you would come and see me, everything that I would tell you. Like I feel like I'm a cesspool of like PCOS information, like just here's a dumping of everything I know. And so I put all of that. It sounds so pretty, doesn't it? But
yeah, you're selling it beautifully.
Yeah. Julie, she's a cesspool.
But I really, some of it's not pretty, I guess, honestly, when it comes down to it. But, everything that I would, when I work with people, what I would teach them, and including a support piece, I've been putting that together since March, and I'm hoping to be done with it. I'm going to be done with it by September. I'm just about done with it now. And so September 19th, I'll be launching this step-by-step guide to food peace and PCOS, because remember, intuitive eating and eating disorder recovery are possible with PCOS. And, I'm like, I want to help you do it. And I just don't have enough time in the day to meet with people one-on-one, because there's so many people affected by it, and want to have this different option, because they're at diet rock bottom. They know diets don't work. So there is another way, and a way to get connected to it. I have a website set up for it, and it's PCOSandFoodPeace.com. And what's really cool is I have a free video series that is starting today when this is launching. And so you have access to a video series. There's some free videos on ways to basically some ways that research has shown us that diets don't work for PCOS, especially ones like keto and gluten-free and all those ones, Weight Watchers, some research on why those don't work for PCOS, and some things that are some mistakes that people often make when they get diagnosed with PCOS that don't help in the long term, that I will deliver for you for free. So if you want to find that, it's at PCOSandFoodPeace.com.
And we'll put links to that in our show notes for sure. That
awesome.
It sounds like such a important project that is going to help so many people. And you're right, you can't see everyone individually, so it sounds like a great way for people to from literally all around the world to sort of to get support in this area.
Yeah, and because I've never been affected by this, I feel like I owe so much thank you to people over the years who've taught me what it's like to experience PCOS, and because science is not so up to speed yet, what we have to do is figure out what works for you, and all those other people that worked before with me have taught me what works, basically. So a big shout out to all of them for, help to find what works for everybody else.
Awesome.
Well, it was so great talking to you about this subject, which I think affects, they say 1 in 10 women, right, has this? Mm-hmm. I think it's way more than that, I have to say. Yeah. Because I have several friends with it, and I don't have that many friends. So it's going to be like, it's like 4 out of 5 of my friends have it. But I guess I have a few more than that friends, but and some of my clients, a lot of my clients have actually said that they've had it. And it's like, this is, from something I had never heard of maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer than that. But, to having so many friends and so many clients that say that I have PCOS, I think that, and there's got to be so many more out there that are going undiagnosed. So I think that this is such an important subject for so many people. And so I'm so glad that you, as a Health at Every Size dietitian, are tackling this and kind of trying to fight the standard knowledge that is about dieting and weight loss, which we know now doesn't work for anybody anyway. So, so thank you so much for coming on and talking about this.
Oh, I was glad to. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to your audience. And it was great to chat with you guys. You're always fun to talk to.
Yeah. And last shout out, everyone should be listening to the Love Food podcast. It's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's one of the best Thanks, ones guys. Out there. Everybody always talks about it. So,
check out Glenys and Aaron's episodes. They are 2 of the best.
Aw.
Woohoo.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. This has been another Dietitians Unplugged production. You can find Aaron at bvmrd.com, and you can find Glenys at daretonotdiet.com.